The wind sliced through Lillian Rose Carter's coat like knives made of ice. Her boots crunched into the hard-packed snow as she stepped off the train platform, the whistle screaming behind her like a final warning. All around her, the small frontier town of Willow Creek stood frozen, shuttered windows, distant dogs barking, and a gray sky pressing down like a held breath. She clutched her leather suitcase tighter, the handle slick with cold. Inside was everything she owned: 2 dresses, a tin of rose salve, a creased Bible, and a letter. That damned letter. She had read it so many times the ink had begun to fade. I seek a God-fearing woman with steady hands and a soft heart. If you can cook and don't mind the cold, I will offer you a good roof and honest work. I look forward to meeting you, Miss Lillian. Thomas Wilkes. He'd sounded kind, practical, maybe even lonely. She dared to believe he might see past her full figure, past the second glances and cruel whispers she'd endured in Boston. Too much woman, her aunt used to mutter, squeezing her arm like checking the ripeness of a melon. Lillian had smiled through it, always polite, always small inside. No more. She had crossed the country for this. A new beginning. A new name, perhaps Mrs. Lillian Wilkes. But the man who approached her now looked nothing like the honest gentleman she'd imagined. He was tall, yes, and broad-shouldered in his worn brown coat. But his eyes were cold as river ice, his jaw clenched tight. He stared at her like she was a broken wagon wheel. "You're Lillian?" She nodded, heart fluttering against her ribs. "Yes, sir." Thomas didn't speak for a long moment. His gaze dropped, first to her suitcase, then her waist, and finally to her face. Whatever hope she'd carried froze right there on that wooden platform. "You didn't say you were," he trailed off, gesturing vaguely. "Well, you're not what I expected." Lillian stiffened. "I included a photograph. Old one must have been." His voice was flat. "I need someone who can pull their weight on a homestead. I don't mean to offend, but you're clearly not fit for hard work." Something cracked inside her. The wind whipped her bonnet string into her mouth, but she didn't flinch. "I crossed 2,000 miles by rail," she said softly. "I've scrubbed floors since I was 7, cooked for 8 in a boarding house. I think I know work, Mr. Wilkes." He looked away. "Don't matter. This ain't gonna work." And just like that, he turned and walked off, his boots crunching snow that muffled every sound except her heartbeat. The townsfolk standing nearby had heard every word. A saloon girl with painted lips snorted behind her gloves. The postmaster's wife whispered something to her husband, eyes never leaving Lillian's face. The train hissed as it pulled away, churning snow in its wake. Lillian stood alone. She didn't cry. Not yet. Her fingers were too numb, her face too stiff. She just began walking, past the general store and the tiny chapel with a broken bell, down the dirt path crusted with ice. She didn't know where she was going, only that she had to keep moving. Each step felt heavier, not because of her suitcase, but because of what it meant. Unwanted. Again, she passed a wooden bench outside a shuttered schoolhouse. A man sat there, wrapped in a thick fur coat, his hat pulled low. He watched her silently as she trudged by. She met his eyes for half a second, deep-set, dark, unreadable. He didn't sneer, didn't smirk. He simply watched. She walked faster. Snow began to fall. At first, soft and slow, then in fat flakes that clung to her coat and lashes. The wind picked up. The town grew smaller behind her. She crossed a narrow bridge and found herself on a dirt road that led to open land. Fields covered in white, dotted with black shapes of cattle. Somewhere in the distance, a dog barked, or maybe a wolf. Lillian paused near a fence post. Her breath came out in bursts, white and jagged. Her toes had gone numb. She looked down the road, but saw no cabins, no smoke, no life. She hadn't planned this far. The wind howled like something alive. She turned in a slow circle, blinking through snow. Trees loomed to the west. Maybe shelter, maybe danger. The train was long gone. So she walked. Branches clawed at her coat. Snow slipped down the back of her neck. Her body screamed for rest, for heat. But there was nowhere to rest. Only white and silence and the thump of her heart. She finally saw it. A crooked barn, half sunken into the hill. The roof slanted, the door hung loose on its hinges, but there was no smoke, no footprints. Abandoned. She staggered to it, pushed the door open. Inside, the air smelled of old hay and dust. It was dark but dry. She dropped her suitcase, leaned against the wall, and slid down the floor. That's when the tears came. Silent, hot, shameful. She pressed a hand over her mouth to stifle the sobs. Not for them, not for Thomas or the women who laughed, but for herself, for daring to believe she could be loved without changing first. A sudden sound made her freeze. Crunch. Footsteps. Outside. She held her breath. Her heartbeat roared in her ears. Whoever was moved slow, deliberate. One step, then another. A shadow passed by the crack in the barn door. Lillian's breath hitched. She grabbed her suitcase, not as a weapon but a shield. She backed farther into the dark, knees trembling. Then silence. The door creaked open. Light spilled in, outlining a tall figure in the snow. Not Thomas. The man from the bench. He stepped inside, boots thudding softly on the wooden floor. He didn't speak. Didn't reach for a weapon. Just stood there, snow melting in his beard, eyes fixed on her with something unreadable. She opened her mouth, but no sound came. He looked around the barn, then back at her. After a long moment, he took off his coat and gently placed it on a nearby bale of hay, not offering it, just leaving it. Then he turned and left, closing the door behind him. Lillian stared at the coat for a long time. Warmth, dryness, a choice. She didn't know his name, but someone had seen her and didn't look away, and that changed everything. The barn creaked with every gust of wind, its old wooden bones groaning like ghosts in the dark. Lillian sat huddled in the farthest corner, the strange man's coat wrapped tightly around her shoulders. It smelled of cedar smoke and pine, and the lining was worn soft, well-used, well-cared for. She had waited hours, unsure if he would return, or if he had left her freeze alone in a stranger's ruin of a shelter. Snow slid from the roof in thuds, making her flinch each time. Her fingers were raw. Her breath came in shallow wisps, misting the air. The coat helped, but it couldn't fight the hunger gnawing at her belly or the cold creeping up from the ground through her skirts. Somewhere outside, a howl pierced the stillness. Not a dog, not this far from town. She gripped her suitcase like it could keep her safe. The wind screamed louder, pushing snow through the barn's warped slats. She lit a broken lantern she'd found under a pile of rags, but the flame had sputtered out an hour ago. The howl came again, closer. She moved slowly, rising to her knees. The only weapon in reach was a rusted pitchfork leaning in the corner. Her breath trembled as she crawled to it, every joint aching. She wrapped her hand around the wooden shaft, heart thundering against her ribs. Then outside, the crunch of snow. Her blood turned to ice. It wasn't the wind. A shadow passed in front of the barn's cracked window. Lillian held her breath, every muscle screaming to run, though she had nowhere to go. The door creaked. A pause, then the sound of it slowly opening again. But this time he spoke. I knocked. The voice was deep, low like thunder in the distance. Familiar. The man from the bench. He stepped inside, brushing snow from his shoulders, eyes scanning the dark. Didn't want to scare you, he added, shutting the door behind him. He carried a sack and a lantern, real light. He held it up, casting a warm glow that softened the barn shadows. His face was weathered but not unkind, beard peppered with gray, dark hair tucked under a wide-brimmed hat. His coat was gone, still around her shoulders, and now he wore only a thick flannel and a battered leather vest. You stayed, she whispered, voice hoarse. He set down the lantern and the sack. I figured you might need something more than just warmth. He crouched and pulled out a tin. The smell of beans and salt pork hit her like a punch. Her stomach growled audibly. She stared, hesitant. I didn't poison it, if that's what you're thinking, he said dryly. Her lips twitched despite herself. You've seen how they treat me. Forgive me if I'm cautious. He didn't smile, but there was a shift behind his eyes. Respect, maybe, or something like it. I saw. Whole town saw. Thomas Wilkes is a mule-headed fool. She looked down, cheeks burning. He said I wasn't fit for hard work, that I was what he expected. The man scoffed. Then he's not fit to own a shovel, let alone a wife. A silence stretched between them, filled only by the soft clink of tin on tin. She watched as he handed her a steaming plate and a battered spoon. Her hand shook slightly as she took them. She didn't ask his name. Not yet, but she studied him. Callous hands, slow movements, eyes that missed nothing. He wasn't the type to talk unless he had something to say. "You didn't have to help me," she said, voice softer now. "No," he agreed. "Didn't have to watch them humiliate you either. But I did." She ate in silence. Each bite thawed her bones a little more. When she finished, he collected the plate without a word and set it aside. She leaned back, closing her eyes for a moment. Then, "Why are you out here? This barn's abandoned." "I own it," he replied. "Used to belong to my sister." She looked up sharply. "Used to?" She passed. "Last winter. Fever. I'm sorry." He nodded once, the words too heavy to touch twice. Another long silence. She didn't mind it this time. It felt safe. Then outside, the howl again, louder, closer. Her fingers tightened around the coat. He reached slowly for the rifle strapped across his back. Smooth, practiced. He stood, stepping to the door, and opened it just enough to peer through the crack. "Wolves," he muttered. "Plural." He nodded. Lillian's breath quickened. "They'll come here. Not if I'm standing between them. And the smell of pork." He closed the door gently, bolting it. "They're hungry. Snow this early makes them bold. What if they get in? They won't." He leaned the rifle within reach and sat near her, his back against the post. He didn't look afraid. She wished she could say the same. "I'm Lillian," she offered quietly. He glanced over her. Finally, "Samuel." She nodded once. "Thank you, Samuel." He gave no reply, but his posture eased just slightly. She shifted, pulling the coat tighter. "Do they always howl like that?" "The wolves." "Only when they're close. Or when they found something that doesn't belong out here." Her heart skipped. She didn't ask which one she was. Then crack. "Outside. Branch or paw?" They both turned toward the door. Samuel's hand drifted to the rifle. Lillian didn't breathe. A low growl. Then silence. Long, heavy silence. Finally, Samuel rose, cracked the door open again, and peered out. The lantern flickered, casting wild shadows. He stepped out briefly, snow rushing in. She almost cried out, but then he returned, shutting the door behind him and brushing ice from his sleeves. "Gone for now," he said. Lillian let out a long breath she hadn't realized she'd been holding. "You're lucky you didn't freeze to death in here," Samuel added after a moment. "I wasn't planning on needing luck," she replied. "I was planning on being someone's wife." He looked at her then, really looked. Not at her body, not through her, but at her. "Maybe you still can be, just not his." She stared at him, unsure what to say. But something warm stirred in her chest. Small, but real. The wolves had retreated, but something else had drawn closer. She wasn't sure what yet, but it had eyes like his. Lillian struck the match with trembling fingers. The flame flared, flickered, then took hold of the fire which Samuel had split earlier that morning. Orange light spread across the cabin walls, casting her shadow wide and tall, as if to remind her that she was still here, still standing. Outside, snow fell silently, but inside, the world breathed with warmth. The small cabin Samuel had led her to 2 days ago was rough-hewn but sturdy. A cot, a stove, shelves lined with tools and dried herbs. Not much, but enough. Samuel moved behind her, setting down a pair of rabbits he'd skinned and cleaned. "We'll make stew," he said. "Good for the bones." Lillian nodded, but her mind was elsewhere. She had heard the voices earlier. Distant at first, angry, sharp, growing louder. She stood and turned toward the door. "They're coming, aren't they?" Samuel didn't answer right away. He poured water into a blackened pot, set it on the stove, and stirred in salt. "They followed your footprints from a barn." Town's not as big as it thinks it is. Her throat tightened. I didn't ask for this. They don't care. He met her gaze. You embarrassed Thomas. You stayed when they expected you to leave. That's enough for them. She swallowed hard. Then maybe I should leave. No. The word landed like a hammer. She blinked at him. I'm not letting you walk into that storm again, Samuel added. Not alone, and not for the sake of cowards. A knock at the door. Too hard. Too fast. Samuel moved calmly, lifting his rifle from its hooks. Stay back. Another knock. Then fists. Then a voice. Samuel Granger. Open this door. We know she's in there. Lillian's hands curled into fists. She stepped closer to the stove, heart pounding in her ears. She's trespassing. Another voice barked. You're harboring a fraud. Samuel opened the door slowly, rifle held low, but ready. 5 men stood outside, shoulders hunched against the cold. Thomas Wilkes led them, face red with anger. Beside him was a postmaster's son, 2 ranchers, and the saloon girl wrapped a fox stole, eyes gleaming with malice. She lied to me, Thomas snapped. Said she was a wife. She's a scam artist. Came here to leech off good men. She's done no harm, Samuel replied, voice like gravel. And she's under my roof. She's under my name. Thomas shouted. I sent for her. She belongs to me. Lillian stepped into view. I belong to no one. Gasps rippled through the group. The saloon girl sneered. Listen to her, putting on airs like she's worth something. Samuel didn't flinch. Leave. Thomas's eyes flicked to the rifle. You gonna shoot me over her? If I have to. Tension snapped tight as a wire. One of the ranchers shifted uneasily. Snow swirled in the wind. The saloon girl smirked and stepped forward. She's a burden, she said sweetly. You think she's going to survive out here? Look at her. Lillian lifted her chin. I've survived worse than you. Then a click, metal on metal. Thomas raised a pistol. Time slowed. Lillian lunged forward, hand reaching for Samuel's arm. A shot cracked through the cold. The world jumped sideways. Samuel staggered. Lillian screamed, catching his weight as he sank to one knee. Blood bloomed on his sleeve, just a graze, but enough to draw her terror into full bloom. He didn't cry out. He just breathed slow, steady. The rifle didn't fire. Samuel hadn't even lifted it. The others froze, stunned by Thomas's wild move. You! Lillian's voice trembled with fury. You shot him. Thomas blinked, almost confused. I didn't mean he was threatening me. You pulled a gun on a man who sheltered a woman you abandoned, she said, voice rising like a storm. And you call yourself good? The ranchers looked between each other, uncertain now. Samuel rose slowly, pressing his hand to the wound. You're not welcome here. Thomas opened his mouth, then closed it. His hand was shaking. You all came out here for blood, Lillian said, stepping forward. And you found a man willing to shed his to protect someone he barely knew. What does that say about you? Silence. Then the ranchers turned one by one and left. The saloon girl cursed under her breath and followed, for dragging in the snow. Thomas remained a moment longer, shoulders sagging under something heavier than cold. Then he left too. Samuel shut the door. Lillian rushed him, guiding him to the chair by the fire. Let me see. It's nothing, he muttered. It's not nothing. Her fingers shook as she rolled up his sleeve, revealing the raw burn of the bullet. The blood had already clotted, but the flesh was torn. She cleaned the wound in silence, the fire crackling, the storm outside thinning to quiet. When she finished, she sat across from him, face pale, hands in her lap. You didn't shoot, she whispered. No. Why? He looked at her a long time. Because you already stood between us and them. Lillian blinked. You didn't flinch, he said softly. You faced them head on. That shot wasn't just meant for me. It was a warning. For anyone who defies their order. You stared it down. She looked away, but his voice followed. You think you're weak because of how the world sees you. But you just did something most men wouldn't. Firelight danced across her face. Her heart ached. Strangely, not from fear, but something far deeper, something older. She reached out without thinking and laid her hand on his. He didn't pull away. "You could have turned me out," she said. "Let them take me. I don't throw good things away just because others can't see their worth." Her throat tightened. "You still think you'll leave?" he asked. She looked toward the door, toward the shadowed world beyond it, then at him. "No," she said. "Not anymore." Outside, the snow slowed. Inside, the fire burned bright. The snow had melted into soft mud by the time the traveling musicians arrived in Willow Creek. Spring crept slowly across the land, hesitant but determined, and the town stirred from its long silence. Flowers peeked through frostbitten soil, windows opened for the first time in months, and whispers of a barn dance floated on the wind like the scent of lilacs. Lillian stood on the front porch of Samuel's cabin, apron dusted with flour, arms folded as she watched the horses pass. A cart full of fiddles and smiling strangers bounced down the main road, drawing curious eyes from every door. "They're early," she said. Samuel, hammering a hinge into the new chicken coop, grunted. "Everything blooms when it's not supposed to." She glanced back at him. "That your way of saying we should go?" He didn't look up. "That's my way of saying you should." She hesitated. "And you?" "I don't dance." She smiled faintly and turned back to the road. By dusk, the barn had been swept clean, lanterns strung between beams, tables lined with cornbread and cured meats. Lillian stood alone near the open doors, heart thudding harder than it had the night wolves circled the barn. Her dress was blue, bright, defiant, borrowed from Samuel's late sister's trunk. The fabric hugged her softly, the lace around the sleeves whispering of another time, another girl who once dreamed of music and movement. She wore her hair pinned back, loose curls framing her face. She looked, she dared to think, beautiful. She caught stares when she entered, some startled, some pitying, a few cruel. She held her head high. Thomas stood by the corner near the cider table, flanked by familiar faces. His eyes landed on her, narrowed, and then flicked away. Good. Lillian moved through the room slowly. She laughed when appropriate, accepted cider when offered, but her gaze kept drifting toward the door. He wasn't coming. The first song began, violin soaring, boots thudding the floor in rhythm. Then mid-song the door opened. Samuel stood in the frame like a storm waiting to break. No hat, clean shirt, hair slicked back awkwardly, as if combed too many times and then given up on. He stepped inside. All conversation dimmed. He walked toward her, slow, deliberate. She tried not to smile, failed miserably. He stopped inches from her. "You're not hard to find." "You're late. You said you wanted to dance." "I said you should dance." He hesitated, then offered his hand. She took it. The music picked up, lively, full of twang and laughter. Samuel moved with surprising grace, large hands steady around her waist, steps careful and sure. Around them, the room blurred, the crowd forgotten. Her body swayed naturally with his, like they'd been made for this rhythm. For a moment, she forgot who she had once been, the rejected bride, the frozen girl in the barn. She was Lillian, and this was her place. He leaned close, voice low against her ear. "I haven't danced in 15 years. You're doing fine, only because you are." She looked up at him, her voice catching. "You came." He met her eyes. "I always would." The song ended. Applause. Shuffling feet. A new melody rose. But Samuel didn't move. He cleared his throat, tugged something from his pocket. Lillian blinked. "What's that?" He opened his palm. A ring. Not gold. Not silver. Carved wood, polished smooth, with tiny mountain peaks etched around the band. She stared. He didn't kneel, just stood there, hands slightly trembling. "I don't have land worth bragging about," he said, "and I'm not a man of fancy words. But I built this with my own hands. I thought if I could shape something strong, something real, maybe it would mean something." The room quieted. People turned. He continued, voice hoarse but unwavering. "You came here to be someone's wife. Maybe it wasn't supposed to be mine, but you're the only thing that's felt right since this winter broke. Her breath caught. You're not too much, he said. You're not a burden. You're not anyone's mistake. You're the strongest soul I've ever known. And I don't want another day where you're not beside me. He held out the ring. The world went silent. Lillian stepped forward. She didn't cry. Not this time. She took the ring and slid it on herself. And then she kissed him, right there in the middle of the room, with every watching eye and every old whisper burning to ash. Applause erupted. Thomas stormed out the back, cider sloshing. The saloon girl said nothing, just stared, lips parted. Lillian pulled back slowly, forehead resting against Samuel's. "You're not much for dancing," she whispered. He smiled. "But I'm good at catching you." Later, under the stars, they sat on the porch in silence, fingers interlocked. The mountains glowed silver in the moonlight, and the wolves howled in the distance, but their song no longer sounded like a warning. It sounded like a blessing. And if you're still listening out there, if you've ever felt unwanted, too much, not enough, remember this. Love doesn't come for the perfect. It comes for the brave. If this story moved you, don't forget to like, subscribe, and share your thoughts in the comments. Because every heart, no matter how weathered, deserves to be held.